Hey everybody, Quantum back here again, and in this video we are going to be wrapping up our final review of the Shimmering Sky set in Disney's Lorcana. This came out as of me making this video 6 days ago on August the 9th, so the market has had some time to adjust, but we are going to be reviewing the Steel ink color. We'll talk about what cards in this ink are meta relevant, or what I think are going to be meta relevant, and we'll review some of the prices and price trends to see, do I think certain cards are overhyped, overpriced, or undervalued right now. Again, this is just my opinion, and you can always check out my channel for the other ink colors that we have reviewed over this past week, the release week of Shimmering Sky. So let's go ahead and jump straight in. To start off, we have a new Stitch in Steel. This is relevant because it is the Stitch name. As we know, this is one of the main characters from a franchise that Ravensburger has consistently supported throughout the 5 sets of Lorcana, and it's always good to have more names because this allows you more versatility with shift targets. Now, this is just an uncommon, and it's a decent effect. It's basically a fire the cannons on a body, but it is a 4-cost uninkable 1/4 that quests for 1, and when you play this character, you may deal 2 damage to a chosen character. So again, not anything that you would expect to jump up in price. It's not like one of those uncommons like Merlin Goat or another steel card that we're going to look at in this set in the Pete, but at 50 cents each, if you do want to pick up 4 because you're a fan of Stitch and you may want to have additional ones ready to maybe shift onto in a blinged out deck, this might be a good option to pick them up while they're 50 cents, because from my experience buying a lot of foils, as you guys know if you've watched my channel, 50 cents for an uncommon seems to be where the rock bottom hits, so you usually won't get them cheaper than that if you are looking for them. So yeah, it's a good value is what I'm trying to say if you want the Stitch, but again, not really meta relevant right now. Next up, we have the Jafar Tyrannical Hypnotist. So this is a very interesting card, and we're going to spend some time here looking at this one. So this is a 6-cost inkable legendary card in the set. It's very cheap right now comparatively to what legendary cards should be priced at, or what you would expect them to be priced at. It is a Dreamborn and a villain and a sorcerer, so it has some synergies going for it with its attribute typings. It is a 0/7 though, and immediately what should jump out at you with this is it gets absolutely destroyed by any kind of the the Ruby strength-based removal. Things like Small Sisu, Human Form, Brawl, Madame Medusa, and etc. It is very powerful though, because on challenge it gets Challenger +7, making it a 7/7 body for 6 cost, and again it's inkable, so in worst case scenario you just ink it. It only has it does quest for 2, and it has a very powerful ability in Intimidating Gaze, meaning that your opponent or opposing characters with cost 4 or less can't challenge. So this gives you like Gontu kind of vibes. It's better in some regards, or pretty much every regard, because Gontu is pretty bad. But again, having this 0 strength makes it absolutely a huge liability against Ruby decks. So would you play this card in a Steel deck? I would say no, which is why the price is so low. It doesn't really fit anywhere in the meta because Ruby is still so popular. But if you are able to play a card like this, it can absolutely devastate certain decks. Things like aggro decks that use Amethyst, right? Amethyst Amber, Amethyst Emerald. They really depend on using things like Madame Mim Fox and Goats to clear opposing boards if you start to be too oppressive against them and they can't continue to aggro, right? Well, this card just shuts every aggro deck down, because yes, they want to quest, they're not going to be challenging too much, but making sure that they can't challenge, how are they outing your board, right? And you're going to be outing their threats, because their threats are aggro, weenie questers like 1/1s and stuff. So as soon as you start outing their board, they can't do anything against your characters, and you just have a wide board, then you just go for game. So a card like this can really slow down certain decks. It can really help you develop certain strategies, knowing that your cards would be protected from getting challenged out, and against certain decks that don't have other forms of removal, basically things that aren't Ruby or Steel that you go up against, could have a really difficult time outing this, because it is a 7 willpower body, and with only certain amount of characters being able to challenge it, it's going to live until your opponent has, like, let's say, a 5 or 6 cost character, right? Again, Ruby does really shut this card down because they also have access to Maui as well as other rush characters that can just run into this right away, right? Maui would deal 6 damage, and then maybe they can finish it off with like a Teeth and Ambitions or something. But the Jafar is very powerful. It is a card that I think is underrated. I bought 2 foil copies at $13 each, so I overpaid probably a little bit, but this was on release. It was the cheapest price I ever saw it. It probably drops the foil ones, I think, to like less than $10 Canadian. But again, I'm not too cheesed about paying an extra $3 because it's a Jafar, it's a cool card, and I think it may come good one day. And even against red decks, or even if side decks become a thing, right? This could be a card that is slotted in to help shut down. Because, I mean, in essence, for those of you that know, this is almost like a floodgate, right? It's a floodgate for a certain mechanic in the game where you can't challenge with X or less characters, so it really just stops an entire strategy potentially, right? You can see here people naming their stuff lockdown decks. Oh, Brendan the Kenyo made a Steel Fasa with the Jafar, very interesting. So yeah, you can see like some people are cooking with it. It might be good, and you know, top players like the Kenyo, so very interesting to see that on the list here. So yeah, we spent a little bit of time there, but again, warranted since it is the legendary. Hopefully my points made sense. Let me know if you made it this far so far, if you agree or disagree with the assessment there. Anyways, we have a Simba Lost Prince. So again, relevant because of the name, Simba, a main character in a main franchise movie, probably gets good shift targets, but how good is this card relative to the other Simbas we have? It's a 3-cost inkable 2/4 body. It is just a common, a quest for 1. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may draw a card. So not too relevant given that the strength stat is so low. I think there are better Simbas you could play. Not necessarily bad, especially if you end up being able to boost up the strength. It makes it easier for you to banish, and it has a good willpower stat that it could probably survive a challenge or two, and then get you some card advantage. But again, there are more efficient card advantage engines in the game. Next up, we've got Rudy. This is our 1-drop 2/2 vanilla, a quest for 1. Nothing relevant there. Doubt he'll ever get a shift either. You have a Royal Guard, a 4-cost inkable 1/7, that quest for 1. Not good in constructed. It probably is pretty good in draft though. I mean, you know, a big body that can just continue questing. Next up, we've got Mickey Mouse. This is another card I picked up 4 foils of. You know, a foil common, it might go for 25 cents, but I picked up mine at 50 cents each because, again, Mickey Mouse, a 1-drop, face of Disney, right? It will undoubtedly continue to get cards and support and probably very good shift targets in the future. And if you just want to build out a nice curve with like a Mickey Mouse deck or something, or just, you know, use the Mickey Mouse because he has a really strong shift in the future, this could be a really good card. You know, 1-drops that facilitate the shift are always great because it gives you a reason to play a 1-drop, which is kind of harder and harder to come by given how powerful some of these cards are getting now that we're 5 sets in. But yeah, this is a great card. I would pick up 4 foils at 50 cents each. I had no qualms about it. Again, a common, it might go to 25 cents, but again, it's a Mickey Mouse name, so very doubtful. Next up, we have the first of the new Knight versions of the 7 Dwarves. This is Sleepy, Sluggish Knight. So it's a 2-cost inkable 0/4 body with Bodyguard, a quest for 1, and it is an uncommon. So the way I look at this card, I mean, it has a bunch of different attributes, right? Being an ally and knight, you know, it's 7 dwarves, a Dreamborn, etc. Or not etc., but that's what it is. The way I look at a card like this is basically it's a location, except it has Bodyguard. So you look at a card like Neverland, the Amber location from, I think it was set 3. It's a 1-cost inkable item, or not item, location, that is basically a 0/4, right? It has 4 willpower. It does not have Bodyguard, obviously, because it's a location, but it gains you 1 lore every turn. So a card like this, you pay the extra ink cost at 2 for the ability of it to bodyguard your characters, right? And ideally, you're just questing with it for 1 every turn. So you could look at it like that. I mean, it is outable by like removal that normally locations would be protected against, such as things like Brawl. But if they Brawl this, you're probably feeling pretty good because it only costs you 2 and the Brawl costs them 3. But maybe they do need to Brawl this because they're like, I have to get over this in order to get to your aggro threats, right? And this is a 0/4. I just have to throw multiple bodies into it. And then I have to get to your aggro threats and I won't get to them. So if I Brawl this, I can deal with your aggro threats directly or something like that, right? So there's a couple of potential synergies. This is a bodyguard that could help with the, like, let's say Amber Steel aggro deck. Of course, you can play it within its archetype of the 7 Dwarfs Knight build, but I don't think that that's going to be very competitive. So yeah, it is what it is. There's nothing too significant here. I don't think it makes a splash into the meta. Next up, you got Kronk, Unlicensed Investigator. So this is a 2-cost inkable 1/4 body with Challenger 1, a quest for 1. Nothing really too special here. Is basically in the set so that you can facilitate the shift on the big Kronk, the one that comes in the starter deck. We'll review that in just a bit. But not necessarily a terrible card. It's just like, Prince Eric is also a 2-cost inkable. That's a 1/3, but it gets Challenger 2. So this one, you get 1 less Challenger for 1 more willpower. And obviously the name Kronk is that you can shift it, right? So I think the Prince Eric would be more useful since that extra point of strength that he gets on the challenge is better. But both of those cards are now basically power crept on the 2-drop slot for most decks, so I don't think you play either. Unless, again, you're playing the Kronk shift, which I think is really hard to do outside of like a starter deck tournament, but we'll cover that when we get to it. Next up, you got HeiHei. This is a 5-cost inkable 4/5 body with Bodyguard and Quest for 2. So what's interesting about this is if you look back to the first chapter, you have a super rare Maximus with Bodyguard and support with the exact same stats as a 5-cost inkable 4/5, but instead of questing for 2, it quests for 1. So basically you trade the support ability for an additional lore quest. Is that worth it? I don't know. The Maximus didn't really see any play. This probably doesn't either, just because on the Bodyguard stat, I think the Chenpo has the most relevant stats at 4/7. So yeah, just the extra lore probably doesn't matter, because if you're playing a Bodyguard, you care more about the stats than its questing ability. And even so, like Hercules for 1 more would be better anyway. So not too relevant, but very good in draft, I would bet. Next up, you got Sneezy, another 7 Dwarves Knight. This is a 4-cost inkable common 3/4 body that says when you play this character, chosen knight gains Challenger +2 this turn, and it quests for 1. So again, only playable really in the archetype. It's not really that great otherwise, so no relevance there. You got Dopey, Knight Apprentice. Again, another Knight 7 Dwarves, 3-cost inkable 2/2 body. That's a common. It says when you play this character, if you have another Knight character in play, you may deal 1 damage to chosen character or location. So again, seems pretty irrelevant. What I would say, like I personally just bought 1 foil copy of each of the Amber 7 Dwarves that came out in, I think it was Rise of the Floodborn. And I might just do the same with this. It might cost me like $4 or $5 or less even, just to get a foil set, because you never know in 5, 10, 15 years if you keep these cards this long, this set of foil 7 Dwarves might actually be relevant one day and be worth a lot of money. I remember in Magic, I bought a lot like foil Sensei Divining Tops from the original Kamigawa set, and my cards were eventually stolen from me, unfortunately, but I think I paid not pennies, but like just a couple bucks for those. And then I checked them recently, for those of you that follow MTG as well, and I think they're over like $100 something. And I'm pretty sure it was an uncommon, right, from whatever it was, Saviors of Kamigawa or whatever it was back in the day in like 2005, 2006 or whatever. So I mean, the same potential thing could happen here. So a couple of bucks back then could have translated to hundreds of dollars later. The same thing could happen here with these guys, right? Because it is a whole archetype of cards. Not really meta relevant. Sensei Divining Top, probably is way more meta relevant, but these are just for the fandom, right, of it being Disney and whatnot. They could be worth something one day. Next up, we've got the 9-cost uninkable cards with every ink color got this. This one is Namaari, Resolute Daughter. It is a 5/5 for 9, but let's see what the reduction cost is, or a condition is. For each opposing character banished in a challenge this turn, you pay 2 less to play this character. It quests for 3 and has resist 3. So the resist 3 on a 5/5 body that quests for 3 is absolutely insane. It's very, very powerful. However, it's not worth the 9 cost, and it's not worth the risk of trying to play this and trying to facilitate like 2 banishes of characters in a turn. Because to set this up, it's going to be a brick in your hand for multiple turns until you fulfill this one, in my opinion, is a very specific condition that is much harder to meet than the other 9-drop uninkable cards and the other ink colors. So for that reason, I think this one is completely irrelevant as reflected by the price. If you did want to try to make this work somehow, I mean, you can get the foil ones for super cheap, probably worth it, if it's at 30 cents, but not a great card at all, in my opinion. Just because, again, it's very expensive. Like the stats and everything are fantastic, but not for the cost. And for the fact that you would brick on it in your hand for multiple turns until you could play it. Next up, we've got the Snow White. So this is just miraculous artwork, by the way. All of the enchanters I've been so impressed by. The artists, like whoever their art director is for this stuff, man, like give them a raise, dude. Because like I never thought Disney could actually be like this cool. Like we know it's nostalgic, but like this is like she's like Superman or Superwoman, right, or Supergirl, whatever it is. That's absolutely crazy. Anyways, yeah, and good artwork here too. So Audrey and Otto, great job, guys. But yeah, 5-cost uninkable Snow White Fair-Hearted, a 3/5 body, so just like the Amber legendary Snow White. This character gains resist +1 for each other knight character you have in play, and it quests for 3. So pretty solid. Getting the resist ability is really, really relevant because it allows you to survive a Zeus, which means this thing is only susceptible to something like a Medusa, which may be phasing out of the format a little bit, or being played in less copies. And Ruby may be checked a little bit harder, Ruby Amethyst in particular this set, but we always say that and it always comes back. But yeah, really, really strong card here. Obviously, this is the goal to hit on board with the 7 Dwarves. But again, you're susceptible to like be prepared and things like that. But overall, a very strong character that functions well within the archetype. So I'm really surprised to see a foil version going for $1.20. I should probably I'm going to pick up a set. I'm going to look to pick that up soon. So yeah, really interesting. Anyways, moving on, we've got a 4-cost uninkable Yzma. This is a rare 1/4 body quest for 2. It says during your turn, whenever one of your characters banishes a character in a challenge, you may deal 1 damage to chosen character. So in my opinion, this is not a great card. I know it's in the starter deck as well. I think it's the foil rare in the starter deck, but you know, very underwhelming stats. Like, I'd rather just play Tiana, right? I mean, and aim to have no cards in hand to shut off actions. But yeah, you know, I mean, I guess maybe there's some things you can cook with this, but you have to banish in a challenge. So if you do like Zeus on something, it doesn't count to deal extra damage. So yeah, I don't know. Not a huge fan of this one, but that's my opinion. Let me know if you disagree, of course. Next up, we got Kronk. So in the starter deck review, I mentioned how like awesome this card was because it is Kronk and he looks pretty badass. And you know, Kronk is like one of the best characters in all of Disney. Really, really well-crafted character there. But a 7-cost uninkable 6/6 body is pretty big within the context of like a starter deck tournament or something. But in actual constructed play, this card probably does not see play simply because you have to shift him really to get the ability off right away. And the Kronk that we have is not really that playable. You're not going to really hard cast this for 7 and just hope to banish something next turn. It is hard to out, so I mean, you could technically play this and like really check your opponent, similar to what Tinkerbell does. When an opponent sees Tinkerbell on field, they're like, yeah, I can't turn my stuff sideways until I'm able to out that Tinkerbell because you're going to like 2-for-1 that Tinkerbell on me, right? This card, I mean, it requires a couple of things to set up. Like, first of all, you need a character that you can banish on your opponent's side that this Kronk can challenge into, and then you can play a character with cost 5 or less for free. What's kind of insane is like in, let's say, Amber Steel, not that you'd play this in Amber Steel because that deck is very tight-knit, but if you like run into a character with the Kronk and then get like 3 or 4 damage on him, then like play the Rapunzel for free from your hand, that's pretty awesome, right? That's like super big card advantage for you, plus you develop your board even further. Like an interaction like that probably just wins you the game. Like Rapunzel healing a character in and of itself is an interaction that can win games. Like, but Kronk getting advantage and playing that Rapunzel for free, gaining that tempo, could be a huge swing, right? But it's very hard to find justification to fit this into a deck. Could be a very good card if we ever get good Kronk targets in the future. Definitely something to keep a look at. If it's less than $1, you know, maybe it goes to like 50 cents. I would definitely pick up a couple of foils just to keep around. But that's just me. We got another super rare. I didn't even know this was a super rare. But Grumpy Skeptical Knight, 3-cost inkable 3/1 body that says Boon of Resilience. While one of your knight characters is at a location, that character gains resist +2. Okay, so pretty strong for the archetype, I guess. During your turn, this character gains evasive. Okay. I guess he also gains the +2 resist for himself if he's at a location, right? So he'll be like, yeah, he won't get like Storm Raged or anything like that, which is good. A super rare, I mean, 3-cost 3/1, I guess is decent. Again, for the archetype, it's reasonable. Not much else to say there. Next up, you got Pete, Wrestling Champ. This is a rare, a 3-cost uninkable 1/3 body. And you can exert it to reveal a top card of your deck, and if it's a character card named Pete, you may play that card for free. So I talked about this a little bit in the other ink reviews, where it seems like their villain characters in particular are all getting like additional cards that may facilitate the building of their own deck. So like Maleficent, there's a lot of cards with her name on it. The Queen, Prince John is starting to get them, and now Pete seems to be getting them. And a card like this is indicating to me that there will be future Petes that will be more competitive to maybe make a card like this more viable, and as well as the existing Petes. So it'll be interesting to see. But again, this card is super cheap if you're interested in maybe building a theme deck, because the nice thing about theme decks in this game, at least right now, is if you look at things like the Sorcerer's Hat and like the new, not the new, but the old Bruno from Ursula's Return that exerts, and you can name a card, and if it's the card, you put it to your hand or something. When you have like 40 characters in your deck named Pete or Maleficent or whatever, like those cards become much more playable because it represents instant card advantage. Well, I should say instant, but a very high chance that you get card advantage. It's one of the reasons why I really like the card like Queen Sensor Core, because it's a reveal and put to your hand if certain conditions are met, right, with the card that you reveal. And that card seems very versatile because I reveal a princess or a queen, I put it to my hand. It's not a specific character name. So a card like this, being a character, is a little bit more susceptible, obviously, to removal compared to something like the Sensor Core, which is an item. Not that items aren't susceptible to removal, it's just people obviously have less tools to deal with items than they do with characters. It's all characters can be challenged by other characters. So keep that in mind, but again, not a card that's going to be very meta relevant unless we get like really good Petes, and we do have one, but we'll see how the rest of it goes. Next up, we've got Sir Ector, a 7-cost uninkable 7/10 body that quests for 3. Not something I see being really relevant at all. I mean, it's a, good value for what you get. I mean, the unique ability is supposed to offset the huge quest and the huge willpower. I imagine that this card would be absolutely insane in a draft, but it's probably like one of the, I don't know. I don't draft, but like, let me know, guys, if you draft. Would this card be like the most powerful card in a draft? Because there is no like hard removal in this set, right? I don't think. So it's like you just have to beat over this thing somehow, and this thing's going to take out like 5 characters along the way while questing for 3 the whole time. So yeah, kind of crazy, but like in Constructed, I just don't see where it fits in. There's just better things to play. So yeah, not really relevant there. Next up, we got Bashful, a 4-cost inkable 3/4, so just not too bad of a stats. It depends on how good the ability is to offset the 1 strength loss here. Impress the Princess. While you have a character named Snow White in play, this character gains bodyguard. So that's very specific. So yeah, not really playable outside of the archetype, really. Quest for 1, so not really relevant. 3/4 bodyguard for 4. Like, why? I have 3 costing 3/3 bodyguard. They should have, I don't know, maybe this thing should have quested for 2. I think they should have quested for 2, and that would have made it at least somewhat more viable within the archetype. I mean, this archetype isn't doing anything serious, right, guys? So like, I think they could have given these cards a little bit more of a boost, but that's just me. Next up, we have the shift target for Arthur, which we'll take a look at in just a bit. Arthur Wart, a 2-cost inkable 2/2 body that quests for 2. So we've seen these cards as well in other ink colors. I think Taffeta got one that was like this, and Maleficent also got a 2/2 that quests for 2, and maybe some others in other sets, but just not a great like statted card. Like, you don't want to be paying 2 for a 2/2 body, because 1-drops are 2/2s as well. Yes, it quests for 2, but like, your whole point of you playing a card like this is you want to shift on it, so you're not going to quest with it. It kind of just sits there dead. I'd rather just be a 1-drop Arthur, similar to what Robin Hood is, facilitating the Robin Hood shift. The issue is the Arthur that this is supposed to be shifted onto, or that shifts onto this, is a 5-cost shift. So you play this out on curve, it just sits there and does nothing because you don't want to quest with it because it's going to get outed by everything. And if it just sits there, it's very susceptible to getting outed by a lot of other things like Brawl, Let the Storm Rage On, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a little weird. Not a great card to use with the Arthur. Hopefully we get better ones in the future. Next up, we've got Happy, a 1-cost, okay, inkable dwarf. This is relevant just for the fact that it's a 1. It's a 2/1 body, so right there, that's a good stat line depending on the ability, because we've seen like Chernobog followers and stuff see a lot of play. Burst of Speed. During your turn, this character gains evasive. Has 1 Lord. That's actually pretty good. I never gave this card a second glance, and I did not buy foil. I think I will be buying foil copies of this if I can get them for like 25 cents. Because again, okay guys, so a quick side note here. If you've been following anything with the market, like Chernobog followers was like up to almost $10 Canadian for a foil copy, right? It's absolutely crazy. I couldn't believe it. And like non-foils are going for like $2 or $3, which is crazy. It's an uncommon. But just the fact that it is the de facto 1-drop in Amethyst, at least right now, and historically, just means that it was so expensive. And the reason it's so good is because it's a 1-cost inkable item that can banish itself for a draw. It's a 2/1 body, which means it trades up into X and 2 characters. So it has some bite to it. And a card like this having evasive, like this thing can trade with a Diablo, right? Like if you drop this on 1 and your opponent's like turn 3 Diablo or turn 2 shift Diablo quest, you're like, great, I have this on board. Like, take out your Diablo, right? That's pretty strong. I mean, among other things, right? So like, yeah, this thing is very interesting. So now in Steel we have this. We have the Jafar, which also gets evasive during our turn. And then on turn 3, I don't know what else we have to play that has evasive or gets evasive during our turn. On 4, I think we have the Donald Duck, the Musketeer from Chapter 1. So yeah, there's a couple of cards here that get evasive during your turn that are probably pretty strong against certain decks. So that's a very interesting one there. Sorry for taking a little bit more time on this one, but this also surprised me. I didn't think we would get like a good 1-drop there. This might be actually pretty good. So yeah, interesting. Next up, we got Simba, a 6-cost inkable character, again with the Simba name. This is a shiftable target, or a character that can shift. 3/5, so kind of a weird stat line. I really don't like the 3/5 because again, it's Medusa, it's Zeus, etc. But it has a very powerful ability. When you play this character, you may banish chosen item or location. So this card just represents a massive tempo swing, being able to out something like a Lucky Dime or a location on play while giving you a character. inherently, in my opinion, weaker than the Cusco. The Cusco does quest for 2, and the Cusco is more significant because I discussed this in the Sapphire video. Being able to put a Lucky Dime into the Inkwell is much stronger than just banishing the Lucky Dime, because if you banish the Lucky Dime, they can always just play a Tamato and get the Lucky Dime back. It's usually not too much of a detriment for them. Where this card is, in my opinion, better than the Cusco is up against Amethyst decks that play locations, because you're not going to ramp them, right? And ramping an Amethyst deck hurts a lot, especially if you have to ramp them a little bit on curve. I talk about this again in the Sapphire video, but if you end up ramping them when they're already on like 7, 8, 9, 10 ink, it usually won't matter too much. But if you ramp them like turn 5, because they play Queen Castle on 4 and you've already ramped to 6 and you play Cusco and you end up ramping the Queen's Castle into their Inkwell, you've just, like, yes, you added the castle, but like you just help them facilitate like developing their curve much faster, which is really, really bad for you. So a card like this has its pros and its cons. It's not necessarily ever going to be bad though, like just straight up getting a item even out of rotation, or a location, even if we get like location recursion at some point, is still good because it still represents a tempo gain for you. Like you develop a character that can challenge or do something while outing the threat that they played the previous turn probably. And it just, you know, to regenerate that advantage on their side, they still have to deal with, I have to, you know, replenish that resource that you just outed while dealing with your character or worrying about your character taking out my other characters kind of thing. So it's still a very, very strong card. It's just be aware of the pros and cons of how the play patterns can work and what you're aiming for against certain decks. Next up, we got Doc, a 1/3 for 2 uninkable. Okay, so an okay stat line. When you play this character, you may discard your hand to draw 2 cards, and it is a rare, and it is questing for 1. So this one is interesting. Seems like Doc always gets some kind of playable card, because the Amber one is definitely the only 7 dwarf that sees play outside of 7 dwarves, right? You know, the ability to quest and reduce the next character you play by 1, and it quests for 2 as well with a 2/3 body, so pretty decent. This one is definitely interesting. I think it is good. It is balanced by the fact that it is uninkable, because, you know, you draw this if you have a full hand, you're like, I'm just inking this, but you can't really do that. So, you know, obviously you want to play this when you have nothing in your hand and you just like, okay, I have nothing to discard, but I'll draw 2, right, for 2, and I develop a character on board. So not something I think we'll see play in like outside of the archetype necessarily. Just because I think there are just better cards to draw cards with, but it's not necessarily a bad card. So, you know, interesting, but not anything too great outside of the archetype. The best one we got, I think, is definitely this Happy. Yeah, that's the only dwarf that I would say would be really playable outside of the archetype. Maybe the 0/4 Bodyguard, which was, where was it? Sleepy here. Because like I said, it kind of functions as a location, but with Bodyguard, and that's the only reason why. But again, there are probably better bodyguards that you'd want to play anyways. Okay, so we're almost done here, guys. If you're still with me, thank you. Next up, we got Arthur. So cool looking enchanted. I think the sword is just way too big, but I mean, if that's what the sword is, it is what it is. Like, yeah, I think I like the design of this sword more than this one, where it looks like it's big, like way too big down here. But anyways, still beautiful art either way. But Arthur, King Victorious. So 7 cost uninkable, 3/6 body. Going for $5, and foils are going for 10. So I did buy a foil for 16, so I probably overpaid a little bit, but I am eyeing to pick up 2 more foil ones, because they've dropped to more or less like $12 Canadian, which is basically what the price is here. Like, yeah, $10 US, $12 Canadian. I don't really see it falling too much lower than $10 personally, just because I think this card will at least have some play in even like tier 2 decks, or like not the most competitive decks. And even in the most competitive decks, like Sapphire Steel or something, I think you could technically make a card like this work. And the reason is because it's one of those cards that is still valuable on play, right? Whether or not you shift it or not, right? 7 uninkable, yes, it hurts because it's uninkable and it's an expensive card. But with Sapphire, for example, like Sapphire Steel, you could ink this with Fishbone Quill. You could ramp up very quickly to play this early. And the ability that when you play this character, chosen character gets Challenger +2 and Resist +2, all right, and can challenge a ready character this turn, could be absolutely momentous, right? You just hold it in your hand for the critical point where you need to out an opponent's threat, and you can combine this with many of the steel threats that get a bonus when they banish a character. So your opponent might see a Tinkerbell on board, like I was talking about earlier, or a Kronk, let's say. Not that you'd want to play this and Kronk because they're both 7 cost uninkables, but you could. And they're just like, okay, I'm not going to quest with anything. I'm going to wait till I out your Tinkerbell, your Kronk, or your 7, or was it 7? Yeah, 7 drop Simba that can deal 2 damage to something else when it banishes a character. And then you're just like, Arthur, give Tinkerbell +2 Challenger, +2 Resist, run it into your ready character, out that character, deal 2 damage to another character, out that character, and my Tinkerbell is like no damage because I had Resist +2, and it was able to run over whatever huge threat you had because it also had Challenger +2. And then I have a Tinkerbell that quests for 2, I have a King Arthur that's going to quest for 3, you have no board because I just wiped it out, and I'm feeling pretty good about that situation, right? So this is one of those cards that is a huge tempo swing card in my opinion, and could be very impactful in certain decks. I do think right now the only real application is in Sapphire, where you could really make this work, because I just think the uninkability just hurts it a little too much. If it was inkable, it would definitely be worth like maybe double the price. But keep in mind, it is a 3/6 body, so it does get outed by Medusa. But again, this is a character that gets you value as soon as it's played. If it survives the next turn, it's just a bonus. You're questing for 3. It's hard to out with 6 willpower as well, so challenging into it, you know, Maui does check it, but it does not get Zeused. So, and it can shift, right? Not that you'd ever really do that, as we explained earlier, but it's a very interesting card for sure. Something I want to test out a little bit more, because I am a fan of the ability. All right, this is the final character, and it's the best one in the whole, definitely in the whole ink. I don't know if I'd say the whole set necessarily, but unfortunately, this is the introduction of Lingering Floodgates. And for those of you that play Yu-Gi-Oh!, I'm sure Magic has them too. I just can't remember any off the top of my head from back when I played. Lingering Floodgates are some of the most frustrating things to ever play against. If you thought Bucky Errata was annoying, this can be 10 times worse for those of you that are unexperienced with TCGs. Because what this basically does, right, is if I'm the player who's playing this and you're my opponent, I drop this Pete. Now you can't play actions until the start of my next turn, which means you're not playing any actions on your turn, which is all, you know, right now the only way you can play actions. So I may pass it over to you, right? You may be on 6 ink and you're like, I'm going to wipe the board with Be Prepared next, so I'm feeling good. And then you're like, oh, I can't do my Be Prepared. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like Tiana, where if it's exerted, you're like, okay, I just have to out the Tiana. You know, maybe I play a Brawl on it, or I challenge into it and get over the resist ability, and then I can play my Be Prepared. It's like, no, once this card comes down, it locks you. There's nothing you can do. Even if you remove this character, you're just locked out of any action. And that is very, very disruptive. It is a very powerful ability, and in certain play patterns, it can be balanced. But for the most part, a card like this is just very unhealthy for the game moving forward. It is a card that I could see being a card that gets banned very quickly. You know, the price reflects how good it is. Look how expensive the foil copy is. I did pick up 5 foil copies at $2 each, because as soon as this card came out, I just scoured a bunch of shops that had some standardized pricing, and I just bought as many as I could. Again, not trying to like buy out the market, because I definitely could have bought more, but I just wanted my playset, and I just bought an extra one in case one of them came damaged, because that's the thing apparently. But it's a very powerful card, and it's a good stat line. It's a 3-cost inkable 3/3. Like, they could have made this uninkable. They could have made it a 2/2. Because what's also really relevant with this is you can bounce this back in like Amethyst Steel. So you play this when it's really relevant, like on turn 6 when they're going to be prepared, on, I don't know, turn 5 when they would let it go. What other actions are played? Yeah, whatever, like whenever you anticipate a whole new world being sang, if you don't want it to discard your hand right away. There's just so much counterplay that you could just drop this on board and be like, you're locked. And then if your opponent doesn't out this, you just bounce it back to your hand with like a Mim card. Now that we have another Mim card in Elephant, and then you can replay this again next turn, or, you know, if you have enough ink to play like Mim Snake, bounce it back, replay this, right? That's a total of 5 ink. And then you just keep cycling this card. And then with Amethyst, you know, you're drawing cards most likely, so maybe you draw into another one. Then you can leave this one on board and play the second one, and then cycle that one a few times. Like, it can can continuously lock you out of your actions for a very long time. And that can be very frustrating, right? Especially for song decks. But to be fair, song decks are very powerful, so maybe they do need a card like this right now. I just don't think long-term it's a very healthy card for the game. So a very, very powerful card, in my opinion, way overpriced. But I shouldn't even say that, because I just told you how insanely powerful a card like this can be. So, like, this card could have been a super rare, and it probably would have competed with Daisy for how expensive it is in the set, right? Like, that's how good it is. All right, so that does it for the characters. Moving on to the non-characters, we've got Tug-of-War, a 5-cost inkable item, or action, sorry, that says choose one, deal 1 damage to each opposing character without evasive, or deal 3 damage to each opposing character with evasive. So just not a card that's too relevant, I don't think. Again, if side decks were a thing, this card would seem really good to put into a side deck, because if you go up against an aggro evasive deck, obviously, you know, you'd want like 4 copies of this, if that's where your weakness lies from your main deck, but just dealing 1 damage for 5, like, I'd rather just play Grab Your Swords, because that hits both for 2. So it's kind of like, obviously this card is like the middle ground, or Grab Your Swords is the middle ground of this card. But this is inkable, Grab Your Swords isn't, right? So yeah, I mean, and Grab Your Swords is a song, which is huge, right? This is not. So yeah, I don't think this card is anything special, and I would probably just not bother with it for right now. But hey, if it's super cheap and you just want to have a set just in case it becomes much better over time, that's definitely something you can do, because it is so cheap. You got a new song, When Will My Life Begin? A 3-cost inkable song, so it can be sang by a number of characters: Ursula, Deceiver of All, Cinderella, the 1-drop that can sing, that has Singer 3, etc. And it's a draw card, so right away it replaces itself. And it says chosen character can't challenge during their next turn. So not very relevant, it's just a common. I don't think this is anything any good, really. But, you know, at least we got another song, I guess. We got a 2-cost inkable action, Duck for Cover. Chosen character gains resist +1 and evasive this turn. Okay, interesting. Probably would have preferred if it gave you a draw 1, because it is an action, so it's very slow. Like, yeah, you can out a threat with this, but it's just not worth playing, so yeah, not great. Food Fight, 1-cost uninkable. All your characters will gain Exert, pay 1, deal 1 damage to chosen character this turn. Again, nothing that's relevant in my opinion. Shield of Arendelle, a 1-cost inkable item. Banish this item, chosen character gains resist +1 until the start of your next turn. So another 1-cost item in steel, which is very interesting. But this one is not very good, so I just think it's, you know, not worth really playing. And then we have Plate Armor, basically an upgraded version of Mouse Armor. This is a 4-cost uninkable, so Mouse Armor was a 2-cost uninkable. And this one says you exert this item, and then chosen character gains resist +2 until the start of your next turn, which is more relevant than getting resist +1 off of Mouse Armor. This card could see some play, because giving resist +2 until the start of your next turn in certain matchups can be very, very strong. And it is an item, so it could fit into Sapphire Steel. But again, Sapphire Steel is already a very, very tight list. To be the most competitive, I don't think you would really play this at all. But, you know, it is an interesting item. In draft, I imagine this card could be really strong. And then you have Steel Chromicon. So this one I know is really overlooked right now, but technically this card is kind of insane. The downfall of this card, yes, it's uninkable, but you're basically looking at this in isolation of like Sapphire Steel, right? Because all of these very powerful steel cards are all uninkable, and the only way you can like facilitate like good lines of play with them is if like my hand is bricked because of a good card like this that's more expensive, I can always ink it with Fishbone. But being a 6-cost uninkable item, that's where the drawback is, because if you can develop like 2 or 3 of these, being able to just exert and deal damage every turn, like 2 or 3 damage every turn, is insanely powerful. That being said, though, it is very susceptible to you losing a ton of tempo and value, because if you play this item and then it gets outed by, you know, a Cusco, which isn't necessarily the worst because it goes into your Inkwell, a Rise of the Titans, a Simba, etc., any kind of item removal, like a Benja, a Beast Hard-Headed, etc., you're just like, I paid 6 for this and I got no value out of it, right? Versus if it sticks, it can be very strong, but paying 6 for this and then losing it is very detrimental, right? It is very powerful, but in order to maximize its effectiveness, I think you would need to see it in multiples, and to play multiples of this would hurt your deck building. And this is not a card you would build around either, right? So you wouldn't like sacrifice other uninkables in order to put this in your deck, I don't think. But yeah, it is a bit of a powerful card, I think. I did buy 4 foil ones on release. I bought 4 of all the foil Chromicons because I was able to get them at 75 cents each. And I think they're just cool cards to have playsets of. But and again, guys, that video is coming later. Hopefully showing you what I was able to buy in singles instead of buying sealed product. But yeah, I do like this card. I just think it's, you know, I think a lot of people just look at this and be like, oh, this is terrible. You pay 6 to deal 1 damage? That's awful. And normally it would be, but you can deal it every turn, right? And if your opponent has no answers to items, imagine getting 2 or 3 of these up against Ruby Amethyst. Man, if it would have said chosen character or location, then it would have been really, really nice. But again, getting this up against Ruby Amethyst, you're just dealing 2 or 3 damage to each of their characters every single turn, right? Like that shuts down a good portion of their deck right then and there, right? Because they have no characters with War, they have no item removal. Anything that Maui challenges into will now trade 1 for 1 instead of 2 for 1, because the Maui gets a couple points of damage on it. You finish it off with this item. Like, all of their stuff can't generate enough advantage, right? They play goats, they play foxes, they play snakes, they play rabbits. They're all dead with 3 damage, right? So, you know, grab your swords plus one of these or a couple of these, and you can take out whole boards, right? But again, very, very hard to justify at the 6 cost on Inkable, and that's why they made it so expensive. All right, we're almost done here, guys. I'm sorry if this one's going a little bit longer. Well, we got a new location in Bad-Anon, okay? A 3 cost Inkable location, 2 to move there, 7 willpower. Villain support center, which is kind of funny. I never watched this movie. I should definitely watch it though. Anyways, villain characters gain exert, pay 3, play a character with the same name as this character for free while here, and it gains you 1 lore passively. So this card just seems terrible to me. We got the Hades in Ursula's Return that does the same thing, but that's obviously on a character. I just, you know, 2 costs to move something here, and then you have to exert it and pay 3 to play. It's just a lot of setup to get like not a lot of value, I think. Again, though, I say that, but like I was just mentioning earlier, maybe this card comes good later on, where, you know, there are like those villain archetypes. Like if you play like Amethyst Steel Maleficent, right? There is no Maleficence in Steel, but like imagine playing a 1 cost Maleficent biding her time, and then playing this, and then being able to move that Maleficent here, pay 3, and then drop like the new 8-drop Maleficent, right? While you continue to develop a couple other Maleficents along the way. Right, that could be huge, because then you activate Big Maleficent's ability and bounce a bunch of stuff back to your opponent's hand, right? And that just clears their board, and then you just continue to aggro them. So, like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just throwing some stuff out there. There are certain lines of play if these villain decks ever do become a thing, right? Like the Queens, Pete's, like we just looked at in this in color, Prince John's, etc. That could facilitate a card like this being good at some point. But again, it is very expensive to set up. I mean, I think a card like the Underworld River Styx is just way better. Being able to recur from the discard rather than having to play a card from your hand, because, you know, you're losing resources and you're sacrificing a lot of tempo in order to facilitate that line of play. Like, I'd rather just use the 5 ink to hard play the character eventually, right? Rather than exert my existing character, play this, move it there, have it all set up, like, and then pay to activate the ability. It just seems like a lot, right? So yeah, maybe not the greatest in my opinion, but you never know. And then you have the 7 Dwarfs Mine. This is a 2 cost inkable item, 6 willpower. It costs 2 to move here, and it gains 1 lore passively. During your turn, the first time you move a character here, you may deal 1 damage to a chosen character, and if the character that was moved there is a knight, you can deal 2 damage instead. So this location is actually pretty strong. It only costs 2, and it does gain you 1 passive lore and has 6 willpower. So that right there, this line of stats, is pretty strong. The ability to move any character here and deal 1 damage is nice. When you think about this card in certain applications, obviously it's strongest in the Snow. Like in the Snow White deck, this location makes that archetype way more viable than it would be without it, to be fair, right? Because being able to move your characters here every turn and just start pinging 2 damage everywhere is really, really strong. It would have been nice if you were able to reduce the move cost by 1 if it was a knight character, because then you have a real incentive to just play the knights with this. But there are other characters that are knights that are not the dwarves, right? But again, you're probably not playing this card with that specifically. But if you're playing this in a non-knight build, right, just having the ability to deal 1 damage, similar to what we just discussed with the Steel Chromicon, is pretty strong. Like, yes, this card is more susceptible to removal than the Steel Chromicon potentially, but instead of paying 6 for the Steel Chromicon, anytime I can just pay 2 to move a character here and then deal the 1 damage, right, to finish off a character, do whatever I need to do. And then all the while, it's also gaining you a lore, so it has that going for it over something like the Steel Chromicon. So all of the benefits of Steel Chromicon I think you get with a card like this, but you have a little bit more weakness into the fact that it can be challenged multiple times and outed, and you have to pay 2 instead of just having this item on board that, you know, starts to exert for free every turn. But again, you get the trade-off in getting a lore every turn as well for as long as it stays on the board. And your opponent has to answer this, right? Because it's just gaining you 1 lore every turn. I mean, I guess they could race you, but unlikely if you're playing characters, moving them here, dealing damage, using those characters to challenge, etc. Like, it's just a cycle, right? So it's an interesting card. I did buy 3 foil copies at 75 cents Canadian each, so I think that a price like this for a card like this is pretty decent. And what's interesting to me is, you know, we're probably going to get more good knight characters along the way. Does that make this card more playable in the future? You know, does a card like this get power crept? I can't see a card like this getting power crept because it seems very powerful as it is right now, right? Like I already talked about, there are some knights, even in the Snow White archetype, that you could be playing outside of playing a Snow White deck. Like playing this Happy on 1, right? Playing the Dwarf Mine, and then moving the Happy there, deal 2 damage to something, and then this thing has Evasive to take something out. Like between moving this to the Dwarf Mine, and then dealing 2 damage to something, and then using this to, you know, challenge into that thing, that's 4 damage, right? Assuming it's exerted. So there are definitely some interesting lines of play that you can use. Like this card does seem very good to me. It's just, can we use it in a way where it's the most effective, right? So yeah, that's going to do it for the wrap up of Steel and the Shimmering Sky cards. This video probably a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I apologize. If you made it this far, let me know. Hopefully, you know, you had this on in the background or something and it didn't take up too much of your time, but maybe you got some good insights from it. Again, let me know in the comment section below and make sure you drop a like if you did enjoy it. Thank you for watching. Quantum is out.